Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be back in Helsinki. And I see I met you last time, at least.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid there's going to be a lot of repetition for you.
Wow.
But I see new people also, so hopefully it's going to work out fine.
I came to deepen my
Your insight.
knowledge.
Good, very good. So I'm doing a PhD at Copenhagen University at departments of food and resource economics. And I'm an economy of background, and most of my colleagues there are economists as well. So that's why I'm at that institute. So nothing affiliated with theology or otherwise. What I'm going to talk about today is a study I've done about comparing the Nordic majority churches, Church of England and Church of Scotland, when it comes to the economy. So my PhD is about mostly in depth with the Danish church. So I'm looking at all sorts of aspects of economy and the Danish state church. But as a part of that, I was asked if I could do a comparative study of 7 churches. Among those, the Finnish Lutheran Church. Here in your country, I have 2 state churches, but I only look at the large one, the Lutheran Church. So I'm going to show you a comparison that I did and what I found out. And afterwards, I would like for the financing of the churches. And afterwards, if we have more time, I would like to show you a bit about the membership statistics and how they developed and how different the countries are in that respect. So the first one, my first objective was sort of just to collect data in order to be able to describe the financing of the churches and to be able to compare it. Because these 7 countries have many things in common, but they're also very different. And the more you go into details, the more different these sort of structures are. Even though in the Nordic countries, particularly the 5 Nordic countries, is all Lutheran churches. But then there are 3 countries with a church tax, and the Norway and Iceland who do not have. And the more you go into details, the more different they are. And then the trends in membership. I want to show you this overview first. I know it's a bit difficult to look at, but I'll walk you through it, so to say. You see, I'm comparing here the financing of churches in relation to the population or the number of members in these countries. In the top row, you see the 7 countries that I'm comparing. If I'm talking about Denmark, I'm probably talking about the church, the state church in Denmark, right? And so forth in the other countries. Be aware, in England and Scotland, the churches are not as closely affiliated with the state as in the Nordic countries. So it's slightly difficult to directly compare. But it used to be, Church of England used to be very close to the English state, but things are changing a bit over there. Okay, so the top row with the figures says total revenue in local currency. And there if you find the Finland, that will be in euro. And I don't know if you can sort of recognize that number, but that can be seen on the Finnish church website. Of course, to be able to do this, I go into depth with what is counted in and what is not counted in, because it's very different in each country. In Denmark, for example, the state church does not have its own administration. That is the Ministry of Ecclesiastical Affairs, a part of the government, who takes care for the administration of the church. So that is sort of counted in as part of that money. Anyways, just to say that comparing these 7 organizations is very complex. And they are somehow apples and bananas. They're not identical organizations, but I did my best in trying to compare the same thing. Anyway, next row I have converted into Danish kroner just to be able to compare it. And then the next row is more interesting probably. That is the total revenue in percentage of GDP of that country. So those percentages can be compared when we look at from a GDP perspective. As you see for Denmark, the state church receives have 0.43% of the GDP in this particular year. The year I'm comparing is 2013. Norway have less. Actually, it doesn't really mean that the Norwegian church have less money so much as per capita, but the Norwegian GDP is so much higher. Then we look at it from GDP, it has about half the money as the Danish church. In Sweden, they have more money than Denmark compared to, again, with GDP. And you look at Finland, have the highest, the Finnish church occupies the largest share of the country's GDP with 0.61.
But we are doing our best to lower it.
Yeah, yes, you have work to do. So looking at these figures first, I see they're very different. You see Finland in the top, then Sweden, then Denmark. Then half of Denmark, 50% down, Norway and Iceland. And all the way in the bottom, you find England and Scotland with only about 0.13 or 12 of the GDP. So just looking at that numbers, you get an idea of how wealthy some of the churches are and how relatively poor others are. And what does that mean, saying in ordinary terms? This means that some churches have more opportunities to do activities. I would assume, looking at these numbers, that the Finnish church have money to employ. They can employ a lot of people. They can do a lot of youth activities for free, or they can do maybe volunteer work, because having money like this enables you to do a lot of things in society. Well, there's a Church of England and Church of Scotland. They're beggars for money, but the little money they have, and yet they still have a lot of buildings they have to take care of. They have as many old churches. Actually, Finland is kind of special in that way. As far as I figured out, you do not have that many churches, old church buildings that you have to take care of, compared to the other countries. So now the next row index, I put Denmark as index 100, and that was just to see the relative difference again, right? And total revenue per capita, there you see Denmark and Norway is not that different. So whenever I speak about Norway, it always depends, do I look from GDP perspective? Saying as a society in Norway, how much money of your total money do you choose to spend on your state church? Then they choose to spend half as much money as in Denmark. But if I ask another way, how much Norwegian kroner per capita do you choose to spend on your state church? It's equivalent to the Danish church. So it depends on what question you ask. This is very typical in economics. It depends on how you ask the question, you'll get a different answer. It's not magical. Then the last row is total revenue per member. And there you see the difference between Denmark and Sweden, and the difference between Denmark and Finland increases compared to when we look at per capita. And that is because the Danish state church have a bit more members than the Finnish as a percentage of the population. So it's not always been like that. We'll talk about that later if we have time. But so far in the last 10, 15 years, the number of members in Sweden and Finland have gone down dramatically, and we can read that from the numbers now. So this was after a long research, I were able to look at these numbers, and then the natural question is why are the level of financing so different? I was just asked to make that overview. That's it. But looking at the overview, I got curious. I wanted to know why is it that different? Because from your own country, you think all the others are the same, maybe, or maybe it's just my naive perspective of the Nordic countries. We're all the same, but apparently we're not. There must be some differences. So my first hypothesis was that the difference could be explained due to differences in tasks, particularly what I would call public service tasks undertaken by the majority churches. Public service task is, for example, taking care of old church buildings if they're national cultural heritage. It could be administration of churchyards, cemeteries, or other kind of public service tasks. So I collected information to understand the scope and the cost of these tasks. I think the next couple of slides I'm going to go over a bit quickly, but I call that reflections on methods for comparison. This was what I said about, I thought I could explain the difference if I took away all the costs relating to cemetery operations, cultural heritage, civil registration, kindergarten. If I took away all that, I expected to be able to account for the differences. And I made up a word I called, the money left must be for church core activity or somehow. But when I did that, and I'll show you here. That's again in the top. You have total revenue, and then I took away church ad, operation cost, cultural heritage maintenance, other public service tasks. In the Finland, it's all lumped together because that's how the church shows it on the homepage. So it's sort of not specified in any of the categories. And then I'm going to show you the next one because this one just adds up what is left then for core church activities. So the top rows shows you what I showed you before, the total revenue, the 3 top rows. And then lower is a financing of core church activities in Danish kroner, and then as a percentage of GDP and as index. And what it shows me here is it did not explain anything. Somehow actually the differences got bigger. So I had to reject that hypothesis. And the reason I got that idea in the first place was with the research I do within state churches. Of course, I often speak with people who work in churches or theologians or other who are engaged, and they said, yeah, but the reason why the Danish church have this much money is because it takes care of old buildings. So makes sense. But then looking closely into it, I cannot, that's not the reason for the difference. It's true they take care of old buildings, but so do the Swedish church and the Norwegian church and the English church and so on. So it didn't really make up the differences. And also a lot of often it can be difficult to understand these organizations. In Norway, for example, there are a lot of Christian-run kindergartens, but those kindergartens are not economically part of the Norwegian church. So it's a totally different economic system. It's not even part of. The same goes for Church of England. They run a lot of schools, but that is not part of the church administratively and economically. So what people's heads, what the church is slightly different from when you look at the accounting, so to say. Yeah, so I had to move on if I wanted to explain it. I want to understand it more. So I worked on a new hypothesis. And I think I want to jump to that because the next here is just, again, methods. What do I compare? Members, population, GDP. You can compare a lot of things. Religiosity, for example. You can also say the reason why the Swedish and the Finnish church have so much more money than the Norwegian church is because people are more religious in Finland and Sweden. But I don't think so. So I didn't even look into it. There's no suggestions in that. Okay. And there are a lot of other issues when you compare, for example, that all the Nordic majority churches have their revenue collected by tax authorities somehow, but there's Church of England and Church of Scotland have to collect their own revenue. It's again just to say I'm comparing slightly different things, but I'm trying.
Norway has it's a very own system.
Yes, yes. But still, all their money, they don't have to collect the money themselves. It's collected through tax system. So they don't have to send out bills to their members, for example. Okay, I will jump these ones because then I want to speak about this, my next hypothesis. And that is that the model of financing affects the level of financing. So the model of financing, what do I mean by that? I mean, what is the main source of financing for these churches? There is what I will call a taxation right. So in Denmark, Sweden, and Finland, it's slightly different, but it's also similar. So the state churches have, long time ago, a right to tax its own members. And the tax is collected through the normal tax authority, so to say. They don't have to send out bills. And then there's what you talked about with Norway here, the general tax model. In Norway, the Norwegian church is financed both through the state budget and the municipality budgets. But it does not have to collect its own money. Of course, these churches can also receive donations, but donations make up a very little part of their money. So these are the main sources. And then the last one I put in is donations and fundraising, and that's for Scotland and England. They have to collect their own money. They will get no money through tax. The only way they get money through tax in Scotland and England are because they are accepted or acknowledged as charities. So when you give money to Church of Scotland or Church of England, you have tax exemption. In the same way if you give money to Doctors Without Borders, for example, or Amnesty International. So they're charities.
One
So-
question.
Yes?
Number 2 there. The Norway system, at least previously, it was so, I know it only from the humanist perspective.
Yes.
That the humanist union gets money from the state according to the number of members.
Yes. True.
But is that not the same for the church?
It's not the same.
No.
Yeah, it's not the same.
Strange.
Yes, it's strange, you can say so. But maybe it's good to talk about it to understand the Norwegian system. In Norway, the state church always gets the money it gets, so to say, or it needs, or depends on how you want to formulate it. So it starts out with the state church gets its funding, and it's often already decided by legislation, so to say, or it gets about 1/3 or about 40% of its money on the state budget. And that is not so much legislation, rather it's political negotiated, but it sort of stays the same level. And then for the municipality budget, it gets about 50%, 55%, and that is very much due to legislation. So it's not like the local municipality cannot choose not to give money to the state church. They have to, it's due to legislation. So first the state church gets its money, and then for the state church it does not matter how many members they have. It does not affect their budget at all.
Strange.
Yes. Then it's not until in Norway they have this legislation that all the other belief organizations or humanist organizations have to have the same money as the state church, and therefore very sort of special calculation is made. So they take the money that the state church got, divide it by the number of state church members, and there you get a kroner per member, and that is then timed by the number of members by the humanist organizations or the Catholic organizations. So that's basically, yes?
Do you have any idea what is the number of members of the humanist organization?
80,000.
Yeah, plus 80,000 now, probably 82,000, very huge. And in Norway, and there are some exceptions because they can accept some things. So what the state church gets, the municipalities can deduct from it whatever has to do with cultural heritage maintenance. They pay when they do that on old church building, that money is not put into the calculation. And there are other more weird exceptions. For example, there are some, I'm not sure if I remember correctly, but there's something about the pensions to the priest that are not included, for example. There's some sort of weird exceptions that the humanist organizations are always objecting to, so to say, right? Okay, and in Iceland it's slightly different. Because in Norway, I said unrelated to the number of members. And also in Norway, you can unsubscribe and you will save no money. It's when you unsubscribe, it can be only due to that you don't like to be a member, because you will not save money like in Finland. In Iceland, it's partly related to the number of members. But be aware, when people unsubscribe from the state church in Iceland, they do not personally save money. That's not how it works. The state church in Iceland get money from the state budget. About 50% is unrelated to members. That is a sort of a fixed payment from the top administration. And 50% of what the church gets is related to number of members. So when they lose member, the church does get less money in Iceland. But people do not get that money themselves, so to say. But what has happened in Iceland since, when was that? Was it last year? There was this religious organization that was somehow taken over by non-religious people. It was sort of already an accepted religious organization, taken over by non-religious people. And they said to new members, and it was very much in the media all over, that if you sign up with us, the money we get per member for you, we'll give back to you. And all of a sudden that small organization got like, I think 5,000 members or something like that. But that's the only way in Iceland you can get your share of the tax, is through that sort of slightly cheating the system that way, right? And in Iceland, a new thing a couple of years ago, I think since 2013, I can't remember, the humanist organization up there gets the same sort of money per member as the state church does. But beware, it's not equal, because it's only half of the financing of the state church is per member. And that's what Seitsemän and the others get. And then half of the financing is more sort of a lump sum. And the other religious organizations do not have access to that money. So it's not equal treatment, it's 50% equal treatment, you can say, in Iceland. All right, the next slide here is sort of just to show you that when I looked at the main source of financing, so this is not the complete financing, but the main source. Let's look at Finland, the first line, and you see the taxation right gave the church in 2013 80% of its total financing came from the taxation right, and about the same in Sweden, and it's about the same in Denmark. In Norway and Iceland, it was a general tax that were the main source, and then Scotland and England, it's more diverse. It's both donation and fundraising, and also income from capital. The other countries do also have income from capital, but it's more difficult for me to find out how much. But I will say that it's very little. Like even for the Swedish church, who have the wealthiest, it's a few percentage. So it doesn't play a major part, because it's money, of course, but the tax is so much more important in these countries. So looking at this picture, I thought I want to look more into, there's something about having a taxation right that seems to be extremely good. That's the best, right, from a perspective of the state church. And then the second best seemed to be on the national budget or the municipality budgets. And the worst is if you have to go and get the money yourself. Seems. Maybe it's no surprise, but I think, I haven't read this anywhere before, and I think it's it's a new finding within this field.
I think
so, yes?
In Finland, this general tax is about 10%, I think.
Yeah.
114 million euros.
Yeah, that's also with because of the new legislation that was enforced this year?
This year.
Yes. So these numbers are a bit old, because I started to look at it 1.5 years ago, 1 year ago, and it's 2013. So it was before you changed the legislation.
Yes.
But true. So then now it'll probably be something like 70% and then 10%, because with the taxation here.
I think it's not. I think maybe it is the same.
Yeah.
Because it was another system, because it was the part of from community taxation.
Yeah.
They all the same 100 million
Plus.
and more.
Yeah.
130 or about some years.
Yeah. So here for the Finnish case, when I say taxation right in 2013, it's both the tax paid by individuals, the payroll tax, plus the tax paid by companies, the business tax.
Okay.
I sort of lumped that together.
Okay.
Yeah. But that would look different now. Okay, so then what I'm doing at the moment is I'm writing on a paper. I have already finished a book chapter for a book comparing the 7 churches, where I write about sort of just describing the what I've found out. But now I want to write an article where I sort of get into a bit deeper of how can this be and what mechanisms are in force here. And the things that I'm sort of trying to look into or looking about is that a taxation right automatically ensures the majority church a share of the economic growth in society. That's one of my explanations. You see, because when you have a taxation right, like in Denmark and in Finland, it's been here for at least 100 years. Then in those looking back in Finland 100 years, there's been enormous growth in population and growth in economy, also per capita. And that is, when you have a taxation right, that is particularly good. Because if you just had the same money, let's say 100 years ago, you got money on the state budget, and that was just regulated by inflation, so it was increased by about 2% a year. That is nice, but it's not so nice when the population is growing also, and the economy is growing more than inflation. So sort of if you just have your money regulated by inflation, you lag behind, so to say, the growth of society. So that's why a taxation right is so much better, particularly when the population is growing. And then compared to donations in Scotland, which are tax exempt, and then church tax, here, you know, economic rational theory will tell us that people will pay 500 euro in church tax or 500 euro in donation. What does it matter? If they want to pay this money, I suppose they'll pay this money. That's rational economic theory, or old-fashioned economic theory will tell us this. But that's not what my numbers show. People in Scotland pay less. I don't think it's because they like the church less or they're less religious. They just pay less. And all studies will always show you that when you need pocket up the money, or money out the pocket, and you see the money, it's visible to you, it almost hurts to give away this money. You give less. Whereas taxation it's not visible. It goes automatically. It's a default. It have all these elements of sort of you're not aware of it, which is enormously important, I think. It's also something we call opt-in, opt-out, which maybe you heard it from the organ donations. That in some countries have chosen a system that you're born into an organ donor. So to say, if you do nothing, you're an organ donor. You can opt out. There's no consequences. You're welcome to opt out. Most people don't. They stick with the default, right? Because they don't object to it. But in Denmark, you have to opt in as an organ donor, which means that we have enormous lack of organ donors. And when people die, of course, the family can choose, but as most people have chosen nothing for themselves, it's very difficult for the families to choose. So in organ donations, they work a lot about opting in, opting out. And I see about the same, I think, with church tax in our countries, that as long as you are baptized, you are default in. And opting out it's just most people don't ever change a default. Look at the settings in a computer. How many of us have been changing any defaults of what the computer does? How long does it take for the screensaver to go on? I mean, all the things that are already chosen for us, we stick with it. Not because, and there's nothing bad about that. It's just how we are.
Laziness.
It's a laziness, yes.
I think 1 year ago I saw an interview on the street, in the street. And the interviewer asked a girl about maybe 20 years, is she a member of the church? She has to think about it. No, I think I am.
Yes.
But she wasn't quite sure.
No.
I mean, that is a thing that many people don't even reflect on.
Exactly.
Strange.
Exactly. They never thought about the question. Exactly. And then the last thing I want to say here is the taxation right versus the general tax. And that is so taxation right, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, one side, and then Iceland and Norway on the other side. And there I think what happened is that in Iceland and Norway, the money that the churches have is subject to what I call centralized budget control. There's a Ministry of Finance that every year looks at that money, and it will be regulated up by inflation, but not more. If the Icelandic church want more money, it'll have to argue for it. In Finland, the Finnish church doesn't have to argue for it. Automatically, it gets part of the economic growth. Which means when we take, I'm not sure in Finland how the growth have been the last couple of years, but it's probably
Lousy.
It's lousy. It's probably been a real growth of a few percentage.
No.
No, not the last couple of years.
No,
Okay.
almost 10 years it has been slightly downwards.
Okay.
Other churches here have the possibility to raise the
Yes.
percentage.
Yes, true. The same in Denmark and Sweden. I haven't looked into the growth here, but in Denmark, even though we call it financial crisis, we still have economic positive growth actually all the years. So it's just a matter if it's 0.5% or it's 2%. It's been among those. Anyway, and actually before I did this PhD, I worked in the Ministry of Finance in Denmark. So I know how the Ministry of Finance in all of these countries is the sort of watchdog over the public spending and the money. And no one comes and get money without extra tasks. You have to argue for it. And also when you're on the national budget, you are competing with healthcare. You're competing with, older people care. And in that competition, it's difficult to be a church nowadays, because how can they argue to get more money? And the Icelandic church felt this very strongly during the severe Icelandic financial crisis, that they were cut. And they had to, I think, let go about 20 priests. In a small country like Iceland, that's a lot. That's a huge cut. So, whereas in our countries we haven't seen, the financing of the churches have so far only gone up in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. No, Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. Okay. Then I want to talk a bit more about what is called choice architecture. And that is for example, choosing the default. It's a whole field within behavioral economics. And behavioral economics is where economics and psychology sort of melding together, trying to explain why things are like they are. It's sort of opposite to classic economic theory that expects people to be rational. So in classic economic theory, we'll say, if you pay church tax, that's because you think that the church is worth it, you have thought about it, you considered it, you choose to pay, we expect rationality. In behavioral economics, we expect humans to be humans. And they're not rational, we're not thinking, we're not giving attention, we're lazy, we are preoccupied with other things, we have cognitive biases and all things. So, the choice architects, as I set the choice environments. That means there would always be some kind of choice environment. With church tax, for example, it's the way that if you're baptized, you become a member, and you don't have to click yes, or you don't never have to confirm your membership. You sort of automatically get into a membership, and you automatically become a church taxpayer later on. That's a choice architecture chosen by the state and by the church here in Finland, and the same for Denmark and Sweden. It could be different in many ways, but can I give a good example of choice architecture? It could also be when you go to canteen, maybe at your workplace or maybe some other places. You will see food displayed in different ways. If it's a school canteen, I hope that they put maybe the salad and the fruits in front. That's a choice architecture. Because we know from studies that if you put the healthy food in front, people will choose it. We also know if you put candies in front, people will choose that. You can do a lot with choice architecture. And don't think that there's no neutral choice architecture. There's always things are always displayed in a certain way for us. And the thing about defaults sort of can both enhance and reduce overall welfare. So for the computer I get, for example, from work, there are a lot of defaults chosen for me. For example, maybe it's the default is that it's gonna make an automatic backup every half an hour. I don't know, I never think about it, but probably some clever person at our IT division have made a default like that. And that is probably gonna be a good thing, because one day the computer's gonna crash and it saved my things. So defaults are often helping us, but it can also reduce the overall welfare. If, for example, a company, let's say at the street I see a newspaper and he asks me, do you want this newspaper? And yes, I would like that newspaper to read right now. And I just have to fill out a form. Maybe I'll say yes to get the newspaper the next month and pay for it. But often what I do in that case is I sign up for some kind of automatic renewed subscription. So signing up for a newspaper or a magazine, and we think, I'm going to remember to quit it again. But often we don't, and we stick with the default. And is that enhancing our welfare? There's nothing wrong with it. It's not cheating, it's not illegal, but is it enhancing my welfare? Probably not. So I want to jump to the last thing. What is the purpose? Now, what purpose is the default serving? Who is setting the default? Is it the company? And if it's the company, or the government, or the Finnish church, which purpose is it serving? The overall good for society, the good for the customer, for the citizen, or is it organizational self-serving? I would expect for a lot of private companies that it's often organizational self-serving. So I have to be careful with the defaults, right? Or I have to, and we know that a bit. Like going into a supermarket, they put the goods, they make the choice environment in the way they're going to sell most goods to me. That's not surprising, but they still get me. A lot of research shows that. But in the case of a state church, like in Finland and in Denmark and in Sweden, this is more tricky because what is the church? Is it a private organization? And have it put the default for a self-serving purpose? Or is it a public organization? And if it's a public organization, I will normally expect the public organization to think about the overall good for society. For example, the public legislation, for example, work with the traffic, how to organize the traffic and set the speed limit and the light. All these things to make it possible both to have traffic but to reduce accidents. This is a choice architecture in the traffic for the maximization of overall good. This is what I expect of a public organization, always to think about maximizing overall good, right? So church tax, is that maximizing overall good? Is the default they are maximizing overall good? I cannot answer that particularly, but I think it's an interesting, and I want to work more on that because this is what I expect for the municipality tax, for example. The municipality tax, I expect it to be set at a certain rate where, theoretically at least, it's maximization of good. If the municipality tax here in Finland is very high and they waste the money on nothing, it's not the overall good. But they probably try to aim at some level where the schools are good and the healthcare is good and not spending too much money. That's probably what they try to aim, at least theoretical. And I think also at a certain point, church tax or the church service were perceived in a different way than now. Church, and maybe also this self perspectives of the state church here is that they're providing public good, that they're necessary for the good of society, and that they make this default for church tax because it's serving a greater good. I think I've asked the church here, they would say, they would. If I told them, are you just serving yourself? I think they'll be very insulted because I'm not sure that's their self-perspective.
Well, actually, on the top of the church, they understand that they are ideological actor.
Yeah.
But on the
lower levels.
Yes, 90% of them think they are just making good.
Yes, okay.
Actually, much of what they are making good are not. They are utilities.
Utilizing?
No. They're not just making good. They are propagating their own organization.
Yes.
Trying to lift their that's sort of branding.
Yes, of course. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Exactly, and I think that's also why I'm trying to say here that the old perspective of church and state together, and just looking at the church as if it's a public institution, that is an old perspective. Now maybe where we are now, 2016, we're seeing more of the state churches as organizations not being just the public. They have links to the public, they're financed by a tax, there are a lot of links to the public, but there's something different than a municipality. And I think this is sort of an understanding that is emerging maybe in society. It used to be, I'm not sure if it's the same here, but both in Denmark and Sweden, we used to talk about that we had church municipality and civic municipalities. There used to be one, and then they were sort of about 100 years ago split, or a little more in Denmark, split into church municipality and a civic municipality, and sort of, but still, still municipalities. But now I'm think we should, maybe we should move on and not see the churches as public and municipalities, and therefore also being more questionable of the defaults in church tax. What purpose is it serving? And is it serving the church more than it's serving the citizens and the overall good? Then it's questionable, I would definitely say.
One perspective is, although we have about 33% of the Finnish population belonging to the church,
Yes.
The important question is how many percentage are getting something out of the tax. They are only actually the active church members who are less than 10%.
Yeah.
So that is one perspective you should lift up. How many do actually get something out from the church?
Yes, that's true, but that's also, it depends on what you mean by getting out of the church. Because it's true that in all the Nordic countries, not that many people actually go to the church regularly. Then a lot of people use the church ceremonies a few times in a lifetime.
Only a few.
Yeah, or attend somebody else's funeral. But what I think is also possible is that a lot of people in the Nordic countries feel that they get something out of the church, even though they never use it. So something I would call a non-use value. Something that is, for some people, it's nice that the church is just there. It's not because they ever expect to go there. They might expect to have a funeral there some point at the time, but the value they get from it is more sort of a nice feeling of it's just there. It's just exists. It's always been there. It's almost like you don't have a royal family in this country, but luckily, but I think it's about the same feeling as for the royal family in Denmark and Norway and Sweden. You can see it's very old-fashioned and difficult to understand what people get out of it, but it makes a lot of people happy that it's there, even though they're never invited to the balls.
It has a symbolic value.
Also symbolic value, yeah. You can say a lot of people maybe think that both the royal families and the national football team and the church, things like that, is part of their national identity. For some people, it's some kind. It's the background color of the wall or the tapestry. You don't notice it, but you notice if it's gone or something. So that's how you can argue sort of against that, at least.
And for example, because in Finland, the government is cutting the public funding.
Yes.
And where I come from the countryside, it's been for years, for decades, the situation that the town or the municipalities doesn't provide services because that's given for the church.
Yes.
And the church provides, for example, summer camps for children or daycare even or something like that. So the government is basically using the church as an excuse to cut funding.
Yes.
And that's, I think in Finland particularly, it's getting even more difficult, the situation. For example, my boy had to go to summer camp provided by a church because the city doesn't provide camps for children.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of it might be a tricky situation in the future because as I read our government's these recent programs and the legislations, they're actually putting more value to the so-called civic society. And in my opinion, that means that they are going to cut the public, like this kind of a official sector, and pour this kind of social needs to the civic sector, which is mostly run by church because it has its infrastructure, it has its organization.
Yes.
So it's a difficult situation.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And it's a stronghold for the church. Yeah. It's a win-win situation for them because they have their tax and it's they have a strong legitimacy in saying that it's only our members paying, And
infrastructure.
And they do, yes.
If you like, for example, like Vapaa-ajattelijat or any kind of a like non-faith organization, you have to build the infrastructure. And that's costly and difficult. But church already has it. So that's the basic that they are using, and they are like taking over the third sector as a provider.
But I would also say, like you saw in my figures before, that having a taxation right is extremely lucrative. It's nothing, almost nothing can compete with having a taxation right. So as a civic organization, even though you're big and strong, like Doctors Without Borders, or I don't know, it could be here, but even large organizations like that is nothing compared to these state churches. So, and I would say, of course, at some point in the future, it might change in these countries with the taxation right, due to that a lot of members will unsubscribe. But so far, even though a lot of members unsubscribe, each money the church still have more money.
For example, my parents are basically atheists, but they are members of the church because of the church's social meaning, and in some way it's the symbolic value, of course, but mostly for their social rights.
Yes.
And I think that's like bummer.
Yeah. But it's there's, like, we're back to what you talked about before, that when they give these, they do social work, and they probably do good things, but absolutely at the same time they also enhance their brand and then sort of gets a stronger position in society. Absolutely.
They have an ideology that they always try to sell in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Actually, I want to say one more thing that I often heard mentioned in. There's very little literature economics have written about state churches, so there's very little. But my supervisor had written a bit, and he often argues that the Danish state church. He just writes about the Danish state church, and he argues that it's very important for society because it creates what he calls social cohesion. So it makes it's the glue. It's part of the glue in society, and everything, of course, from an economic point of view, what creates glue or social cohesion, it's good because it creates trust, and high trust society is very good for the economy. We can deal with each other, interact with each other without having lawsuits all the time and these things. So of course it's very good. But if we look a bit more about this, does it actually create social cohesion?
That's what would be my question, because it's a very old-fashioned natural assumption from the times when 95% belong to the church.
Yes.
But I will question it now.
Exactly. Things are changing now. We never know if it ever did, but at least at these times where more people are not members and do not feel like members, there are certain divisions, both from, probably in Finland, it's mostly the ethnical Finnish population being members. So you have the non-ethnical Finnish population they don't have to be Muslims, it can be from everywhere. There are non-members, so that's one division. And the other division is if you are sort of member, you're particularly religious just because that's what you've done, and then persons more like you're like conscious atheist or non-religious, that's another division. And there's probably a new division coming up. There's a what's it called? A division between the younger population and the older population. I think we're going to see that more outside. So is it creating social cohesion, or are the state churches maybe in some point also creating social division? I think that's questionable. I cannot answer it. I don't know how to research it, but it's a question. Yes?
In Finland we have two churches.
Yes.
State churches.
Yes.
With taxation.
Yes.
In no other country I think there are.
No.
Yes. But you haven't counted for the percent for the Orthodox Church.
No, I haven't.
It's so small.
Yeah.
It's so
Yes,
small.
yes.
It's so small,
But still,
like,
yeah. Your special
they are
history.
getting. Some people say that they are getting even more money per capita than these Lutheran Church.
Okay, is it because it has set its tax percentage higher? It might have a higher percentage.
No, it's not, no.
I think that a small church has higher costs per capita also for the main administration.
Yes. Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
well,
And they have so much gold
I don't know
churches.
so much about it, but I haven't.
Yeah.
Nobody has been
Looking into it.
researching for that and so on.
Yeah.
And the Orthodox Church is getting more members nowadays, I think, because there are people who are moving from Russia to
Yes.
Finland.
Yeah.
They like to put them in the Orthodox Church.
Yes, true. Yeah, they have immigration. Yes.
Still about this glue or social cohesion. It's interesting if you follow the media and if there is a like in basically Finland has a system of independent municipalities. They are
Yes.
very independent.
Okay.
But if you have an accident, a big accident, fitting a school shooting or a big explosion in the factory, and then people are seeking somebody to kind of step into leadership. In most cases in Finland, it's the priest. It's not the municipal leadership who have kind of adopted the role of giving social cohesion. And that's very. I've been wondering why is it? Is it a typical question, or are you touching this question somewhere?
Yeah, not in my research, so I can't tell you. But I have a slight clue for why it can be. The first thing, priests and the church are more expected to know something about death, for example, and to be able to handle those situations. And the second thing is in the municipalities. And the municipalities are sorry?
Short-lived.
Yes, also, and they're sort of afraid of touching. Often a politician would be afraid of touching sort of very touchy elements or so. Politicians and the municipality administration can easily be criticized if they step just slightly wrong. They can easily be criticized, but the church have sort of more elbow space because they're seen more private somehow. And then another thing is also that the municipalities, they have a lot of tasks. They have a lot of work to do. They're like, they have probably, I would say, often little money and a lot of work, a lot of old people, a lot of school kids. Like they're occupied with everyday work. The church, on the other hand, they don't have many tasks. They decide the task themselves. Of course, they do Sunday mass, but it doesn't occupy all the time.
And they have the physical space buildings.
They have the buildings
very
also.
Empty, very empty.
Yes, they have buildings also for it. And then, but I think it's also very much it's probably also the perception of the population. It's often been like that, always been like that. You look to the church in that case, and the church are very quickly to take up the task. But maybe with the change of generations, we'll see a change, because the municipality sometimes also have buildings, maybe old beautiful town hall buildings, for example. They could do something inside, but it's just they're not accustomed to it. It has to be the first time. Sometime.
I have to say,
Yes.
First, I'm a Bachelor of Arts at Comparative Religion
Yes.
at Turku University, and for me this is a really interesting conversation. However, but it's about this kind of moral background of the society altogether. So in Finland we have this really big notion that the moral background is always like religious based. And moral and ethical questions are given to the religious institutions, like you said.
Yes.
When there is like catastrophe or something, when you need a kind of help for trauma or anything, so it's the religious specialists that you are seeking for.
Yes.
I think that's an interesting debate. But we have to like question the idea that the basis of society is religion, or we have to redefine what is religion. Well, that's a whole another debate. But I think we have a lot to do in that situation. That when there is like death or traumatized situations, that you don't automatically seek help from the church. You have like this kind of a how would I say profane institutions or people to go to that situation. That we have a lot work to do.
Yes, and somebody also have to set the examples. Like, you remember with the shootings at Utøya in Norway? The church were also really quick to react, and people. But there were also other elements going on. There were Jens Stoltenberg, the prime minister at the time, had a really famous speech. Maybe heard, and I remember some part of it where he says, "Our answer is going to be, we're not going to be naive, but our answer is going to be more trust, more openness, more." So it was a really strong speech and very fantastic content. And there was another reaction also. They went out marching with flowers and I think some torches with fire. So they're sort of. I mean, the church were also having religious ceremonies, and people went to put flowers in front of the cathedral or the dome in Oslo. But people were also doing these other sort of, not peace marches, but I would say sort of marches to come together and inspire hope for each other. And actually, so it's also, I think we are in a changing society where we can sort of, it goes both ways. In Denmark, we had this so-called terror attack. There was like one lunatic person, but it was terrible anyway, and he went off shooting in a public meeting that had to do with the freedom of speech. And our prime minister at the time, Helle Thorning-Schmidt, also made a really nice speech. So again, it was a totally non-religious setting. It was her as sort of the speaking on behalf and to the nation about how we should react on this. I think she didn't copy Stoltenberg, but she took on the same role. And people were again also going to the streets, not in anger, but in say, okay, we'll conquer this. We'll stand together, so to say. So
yes, I think that it was a little bit the same after the tsunami when this is president take a role, did that kind of role. I think that as for the crisis, we have thanks for people, crisis organization with public sector and with Red Cross.
Yes.
And I think after accident or something, they are giving the real help for the victims and the parents or some other, and also on mental health and so on. But the church have a good media strategy, and they very soon they say that the churches are open, and then the TV is there and the priest is saying that I have no words, but I am here.
Yeah.
The church is also very active after these events. There is easy to say that now the churches are filled. But what they do not say is that maybe only 2 or 3% of the members are coming to the church. Okay, the churches can be filled for a short moment, but it's only a very small percentage. But they're good market.
Yes.
They have like in army, these like social priests.
Yes.
And they have a position there. And for example, when our parliament opens like that season, they go to church, and I think that's a big problem. For me, as I said, I grew up in a countryside, and there is no option. You have to go to church. If you don't go to church, you are like out of the community, and I have to fight for my right to not to attend church events and stuff like that. But that's kind of that's just one of the, like you said, the default situation.
Yes.
Or stuff.
Yeah.
There we have a lot to do.
Yeah.
also know that.
Absolutely. And actually, I want to say just one bit about the default. For example, I don't call that a default, but it is a setting somehow that your parliament. You said your parliament is opening with a church ceremony.
Yeah.
And that's
Every year.
yeah. It's the same in Denmark and in Iceland, and I think probably in the other countries as well. And there's something about that. The way of doing it is, it's what we call implied endorsement. But it means that when that's the natural option, when that's the default, somehow most people get the idea that that's the recommended. That's a natural choice. That's a good choice, right? That's one thing. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Something more about what
Yeah.
is default. I don't know if it's still now, but I know that in 70s, if a Finnish person moved to Denmark or Sweden,
Yes.
then they were automatically make her pay taxes for the
Yes.
Swedish or Danish church, even
Yes.
if she didn't belong to the church in Finland. It was automatic because most of Finnish people belong to Finnish church, so
Yeah.
they made them put to pay taxes for the Danish church,
Yeah.
even if she had nothing to do with the Danish church,
Yeah.
not with the Finnish either. I
Yes.
don't know when they stopped this automatic thing that
Yeah.
she had to get out for
Yeah.
the second time
Yes.
from the Danish church, even if she had never joined it.
Yes. I think nowadays, actually, I would like to look into it a bit more details. But what I've heard from the Ministry of Ecclesiastical Affairs in Denmark is that what happens is when foreigners move to Denmark, they have to fill out information, and one of the information they have to give is, and that's what I would like to see in writing exactly how it's formulated. But it's something about. Are you, or do you belong to, or do you? I'm not sure how it's formulated. Are you, and then they can tick off some boxes. Or I'm not sure how many boxes, but or at least they can tick off if they are Lutheran. So a lot of foreigners, they don't, so far as I understood in Denmark, realize that when they tick off the box Lutheran, because it could also just mean you're from Germany. Yes, I'm Lutheran. I'm from Finland. Yes, I'm Lutheran. I'm not sure this is how your friend was many years ago. I think this is what it was changed into. So if you sort of tick off that box, I don't think the foreigners do understand that means they're going to pay church tax. That's the sort of bit, the bit sort of cheating in that default. But I have to look more into it because I heard it from the Ministry of Ecclesiastical Affairs, but I haven't seen the form. I think I have to figure out where I can get that form and see how exactly it's written, because that's choice architecture, like we talked about before. And it's choice architecture. How much do you tell people? So when you're writing that, for example, you can write really clear. In Denmark, we have this church tax paid by the members of the Evangelical Lutheran Church. Would you like to be a member? That means you're going to pay this amount of money in church tax. Yes or no, right? So, and if nothing is ticked off, it's a no. That's another way of putting the choice architecture. Yes?
You have this economic perspective, and I was thinking, is there any calculations to compare, like if you have a public service, for example, like daycare or school camp or summer camp, or which is provided by cities or state, compared to provided by a church. I mean, if you pay for church and the church provides some services, what is the cost and benefit calculation compared to the public sector?
I can answer your question. You ask if there are studies made, and there are no studies made of that sort. I would think the most interesting, maybe one of the most interesting fields could be to analyze the cost efficiency. This is what we're talking about, cost efficiency, right? The cost efficiency of running cemeteries. I'm not sure how it is in Finland actually, but in the other Nordic countries, or at least in Denmark, Sweden, Norway, you have both municipalities running cemeteries. In Denmark, it's the 11 biggest municipalities of Copenhagen, Aarhus, Aalborg, they all run cemeteries. So 1/3 of the population in Denmark are not buried by the church, but in the municipalities. And looking at that economy, how efficient do they run it? Or looking at the church, how efficient do they run it? I think that will be an interesting case, at least what I've looked into in Denmark. In Finland, are any municipalities here running cemeteries? One. With
Grankulla is a small elitistic municipality 20 kilometers northwest from Helsinki.
Yeah. Yes.
They are running their own.
Yes. Okay. But it could also be, of course, you can do the same cost efficiency analysis of kindergartens and so on. But I have not seen any of the sort.
Because I'm interested, if I put €1 for the church and €1 for the state,
yes,
what would I get? And in my gut feeling is that for church it's much less, because the church has, I think the infrastructure compared to the services that they provide is huge compared to the public sector, at least at this moment after these cuts.
Yeah.
That's my gut feeling. I don't know.
I'll agree. I think I'll agree with you. And from an economic perspective, how we would look at it is that the municipalities here are probably pushed to be efficient. They're measured. They're looked over. Your Ministry of Finance carefully look, and they make a lot of analysis and compare the municipalities up against each other, and they're again and again pushed to be more efficient. And that has not been done with the church. But not here and not in Denmark. But the church set their cost themselves, they decide themselves how to do it, and it's up to the church itself to follow up. And I think if the municipalities here were left, let's say the municipalities here were run like the church, so the municipalities could decide their own tax, they can decide what tasks they want to do, they only themselves to follow up. How efficient do you think your municipalities would be? Not very much, right? This is basic economic theory. Yeah. That if you're not pushed by, basic economic theory in this case would say, if you're not pushed by the market and you're not pushed by any other control mechanisms, you're left to yourself and decide your own income, you grow fat. Yeah, it's not a surprise. So I'll not be surprised anything like that. Yeah. Yes?
Just one kind of additional question about this. You said that 1/3 of the cemeteries in Denmark are run by the municipalities.
Yes.
What kind of cemeteries are they? Are people there divided according to their religion, or is it just mixed?
There's a mixed answer, so to say. It's not 30% of the cemeteries, but it's 30% of the population being buried. Yeah. Because often the municipality cemeteries are huge, where there's a churchyard around a church is smaller. And how is it? It's up to the municipalities how they organize it. Often it's all Christian. The cemeteries were Christian when they were sort of laid out 100 years ago in Copenhagen, for example. So they're sort of Christian cemeteries taken over by the municipalities. But they work on, many of these municipalities have certain areas for Muslims or others, and they're also made areas for atheists or called non-religious areas. But you can see in a cemetery, it's sort of depending how you look at it. But from a naturalistic perspective, Earth is Earth, so maybe it doesn't matter so much. But it depends on a feeling, so to say, right? Yeah. And then there are also some Odense, for example, made a cemetery in the forest. That's a new option that come up. So there you don't see, because there will be no gravestones or any marks of the graves. It's a forest, and that's where the
ashes.
Yeah, the ashes is buried in the ground. Oh. Yeah, but no coffins. And so it's just nature, so to say. And there you can't see people or Muslims or Christians or whatever buried. And actually, I think that touches a bit about another thing you mentioned, that in the countryside here there's no alternatives. You and me talked about it on the way over here also. You said that I think I see all the time in our societies a sort of schisma of. So before we had these state churches, and 99 or 95% of the population were members, so it was natural that state churches did so and that, being, for example, priests in the military and so on. Yeah. So in other countries in the middle of Europe, where they've always or for a long time had a Catholic church and a Protestant church, they have more sort of from a long history of having both Protestant and Catholic priests in the hospitals and in the military. And later came humanist chaplains, and later came imams and so on. So in these countries, particularly in Holland and Belgium, partly also other countries like Germany, they're sort of taken over this idea that religion is still important, or at least the religious organizations play a big role. So now instead of just dividing it between two churches, it's divided by more. That's also in Holland, they call it a pillar society. So you can go to a Christian or a Catholic kindergarten, and you can go to a Catholic university, or you can go to a humanist university. What I want to say, in the Nordic countries, we don't have that from before. We have not inherited a pillar society. We had a united society, or we could be very homogeneous.
I don't know if it's peculiar to Finland, but in northern parts of Finland we have this Christian sects.
Okay,
which were based around these charismatic leaders. And there is a bunch of that, like almost every municipality has its own kind of a sect. And the interesting thing is that they have like gathered this kind of social influence.
Yes.
You have to be a part of it if you want to like run a business or do anything.
Right.
Basically.
Yes.
I don't know if that's peculiar to Finland.
I think a bit.
Phenomenon.
Yes, a bit.
But I think that's interesting.
Yes.
We have a bunch of really like influence sects.
I think that's a bit special to Finland. But what I think for the Nordic countries, there's a sort of a general theme that we have to think about for the future, and that is, do we still want a society which is homogeneous or united society, or do we sort of move to a pillar society? And for example, in Norway now, in the military they take in both imams, but also humanist chaplains or humanist priests, so to say. So sort of taking over the Dutch model. And in Denmark now, when they build new hospitals, they not only make a church room, but they also make a Muslim prayer room, a non-religious reflection room. And and I'm thinking, every time we have a high school, do we need 5 different rooms to go into? Or and my perspective is that dividing it like this is probably more serving the interest of the organizations than it's serving the interest of the people. Because most people don't care, and they're not particularly either one or the other thing. They do not care. And again, from a social cohesion perspective, it's probably not super clever to move into divide the society into pillars. But again, you can't really say really, because we cannot pretend that we're all the same, that we are homogeneous. We are different, of course, and there should be open space for that. But you see, it's a schisma all the time. So when they build a new hospital here, is it good if they build it with an Orthodox church room, a Lutheran church room, prayer room, and is that a welfare enhancement, or is it actually a step back or a step to the side? It's
a step backwards, I think. In Finland there have been occasions where they have one room and then they can change it according to who is having their ceremony.
Yeah. So
it's basically neutral, but then you can put in some Jews or Muslim or whatever symbols you want to.
Yes.
That's more economic way to put it.
Economic, and then maybe also more a uniting way, that we are all humans. We are all able to step into the same room. We are not that different as humans, as we can still use the same room.
Just the decoration.
Yes, like that. But particularly in Sweden and Norway, there is this strong discourse about equality. And also the humanist organizations in Sweden and Norway, particularly Norway, speak a lot about equality. And I'm not saying it's wrong, it's just when they speak about it in that way, it's moving into a pillar society, because it's then giving the organizations equality, but I'm not sure it's welfare enhancing for the population in the countries. That's the thing. Yes?
I have seen that there's a problem with these Muslims or people who come to Finland from Muslim countries. most of them are just what I could call just normal people. And there have been Muslims in Finland for 100 years, but very few of them. And they have been like any other people. But now we put some power to those who are very religious.
Yes.
Although most of the people who come from Afghanistan or Iran or so are not very religious, and some of them even get out of these countries because they don't like that much religion. And then when they come here, when we put them, we take a moment to ask at what do Afghanistan people like, and then we believe that that the Imam knows.
Yes.
But perhaps he doesn't know it all.
No. It's true, and that's the same thing is happening in all the Nordic countries, and that's sort of, and I think it comes from the power that the state churches have, and then we sort of apply that to the Muslims as well. Should we say that was it for today, or?
Just one question.
Yes.
Which actually you did come around to the question. But do you have any suggestions or ideas of how to what would be the I think the best situation or the better situation? You mentioned the pillar society.
Yeah.
But, do you have any should we go for the separation of the state and church, or even deeper and more?
If I should come with a suggestion to you, there are several, but first of all, I would say it's money. Money is enormously important, and maybe it's simple to say, but money makes the world go around, and it's the money that the Finnish church have that enables the position that it has today, and it's not going to get weaker soon, I would say. And as you mentioned before, it might get stronger actually, because it gets into do social work, and that'll be funded, and so the money issue is very important. Exactly. So I think, and what can sort of weaken the money position? There are two things. One thing is you can question, why does it have a taxation right? And what is said in Denmark, the church argue for its taxation right by saying, oh no, it's not a tax, it's just our membership fee. But if it's just a membership fee, then let them collect it as a membership fee with no default. That's the Achilles heel for them. If they cannot automatically collect the church tax as it do today, that will be enormously hard and difficult. And this is so hard and difficult, it's not politically feasible, okay? Because it will be a blow to the church. So the second thing is, of course, that slowly, as what you're seeing already, is that when the number of members decline, the church will have less money. And true, in the beginning they can just increase the church tax, but they cannot do that forever. And what we will see is probably the tipping of an iceberg in all these countries. At some point, it's no longer the normal thing to be a member of the state churches. So far it is the majority, but we're also seeing, particularly in Sweden, that it's heading towards, I think it's about 63% of the population now being members of the state church, and it's declining fast. And when in some areas of Sweden, which means the largest cities in Stockholm and Göteborg and Malmö, I think it's less than half, I'm not really sure, but I think so. And there, it becomes a choice that you have to argue for. If you baptize your child in Stockholm, you will have to answer why, because it's not the majority thing to do anymore. And at some point that's going to happen in Finland as well. And then what a theologian that I worked with, he calls it, he says that it's a tipping of the iceberg. At that point, where Nordic people have to tell why they're members and why they believe and why they choose, or when ceremonies become active choices, then we're going to see a decline in membership swifter than we've seen before. Yes?
In Finland, there are some people also arguing that the Catholic Church and the Muslims ought to have taxation rate like they do, because we have these two churches.
Yes.
So it would be so natural to have 4 churches, for
Yes.
instance. And
Yes.
have there been the same kind of discussion in Sweden or
Yes.
Denmark?
Yes. In Sweden, they already have that right. When they made the separation of state and church in 2000, well, I would say the so-called separation, because it's not really, it's more like a legal separation. And the Swedish church kept its taxation right unchanged. And what was changed then was that other religious organizations could apply for being acknowledged and then being able to have a taxation as well of their own members. I think that is enormously wrong direction to go. Again, from an economic perspective, this is a big subject, but who have a taxation right? What are we using tax for? First of all, we have to understand that taxation, income from taxation, is enormously lucrative and efficient. It's a fantastic way of collecting money. Therefore, it can only be used for public service tasks. Taxation cannot be used for private purposes, and then we have to answer what is private purposes. In old times, you would have dictators and warlords leaving tax on the population, using it for their own household. Okay, that is a time before democracy. Now we have democracy, and the tax is always decided by the parliament. So in Finland, it's the Finnish parliament who can take away the taxation right from the Finnish church, as it has given it to it. And private organization like Amnesty International cannot just decide by itself to have a tax. It has to be granted by the parliament. We are in a democratic country. And so to say that, so if some private organization should have a taxation right, and maybe let's stay one step before. So the parliament always decides tax, and it has to be that way in a democratic country. The parliament can decide to give a taxation right to other organizations, for example, the municipalities. But the municipalities only have this taxation right because they do public good, and they have public tasks that they serve. And they also control, they cannot set the tax themselves. So if the parliament should decide to give a taxation right to a private organization, that is a big step. And then we have to look at what good does that private organization do for society. Maybe the church does good things, but then if a church should have a taxation right, why not Amnesty International? Why not? You need to make a difference here. If ever one private organization should have a taxation right? And that's what I think you should argue. Sorry.
Yes, I think we all think the same.
Yes.
But you told that some other churches have already taxation right in Sweden.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
They have it in Denmark too.
No.
No, not in Norway, but in Sweden. I think this is very important. And
Yes.
And I don't like it.
No, I think it's a wrong step to take. It's a step away from how tax money should be used and the whole concept of tax. And the only reason why our state should have this taxation right is because they used to be viewed as public institutions. They used to be part of the public. That's why there's a remnants of history. And that remnants should not be applied into the future, I think.
But I think it's interesting that you said it, because it's kind of basic question about taxation, because in Finland
Yes.
we have these kind of municipalities who collect taxes, but they are basically unable to provide services because they have so much in debt.
Oh,
so that's
yeah.
a kind of a.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting basic question.
Yeah.
Whether, and of course, we in Finland we talk about that this cutting public services, but
Yes.
this increasing funding for arms and
Yes.
military.
Yes.
So that's a kind of a basic question.
Yeah. And then touching on that, I mean, the parliament have given municipalities taxation right, and the municipalities have a certain local area that they work within. But what the parliament has not done is it will be very inefficient if each state organization had its own taxation right. Imagine if the church, let's say, okay, we accept the church as a public institution doing public good. If we accepted that, then we say, then it can have its own tax. No, it cannot. Because the military should not have its own tax, and the police shall not have its own tax, and the Ministry of Culture shall not have its own tax. And why shall it not have that? That is because then, if they have their own tax, we cannot do we cannot easily transfer money from one sector to another. And the politicians as the representatives of all of us, need to have an easy overview, and we need to be able to transfer from military to health sector if that's what we want to do. And if they have their own taxation right, that is difficult. So no state institution should have its own taxation right. It should be always granted money over the state budget. So in that way, from an economic point of view and from taxation theory point of view, the Norwegian way and the Icelandic way is a better way of doing it. It's more transparent. You can say it's wrong that they get the money over the state budgets, but it's transparent, at least, therefore then you can sort of discuss it. Yeah.
So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.